Right, welcome to another physical media update. This one's fairly big, so big in fact I'm going to split it into two parts. Quite a lot of Blu-rays, quite a lot of DVDs, and a ton of other crap. So let's get started. So I've got quite a few tickets this update. A cinema ticket, which is very rare because I've not been to cinema in a good number of years now, up to this point, and a theatre ticket. So we'll start off with the cinema ticket. The cinema ticket is for A Memoir of a Snail. This was the new film from Adam Elliott, who also directed Mary and Max. Fantastic film. It's a stop motion thing. Very, very. It's not as depressing as a lot of people make it out to be, but it is quite a hard watch in places. But an incredibly powerful film nonetheless, which you would come to expect from Adam Elliott. Highly recommended. Not a film to show your kids, by the way. It's a 15 for a reason. I would say I prefer Mary and Max that bit more, but it's hard to say as both films are great in their own way, and I would highly, highly recommend it. So yeah, that was A Memoir of a Snail. Then we move on to the theatre ticket, and this is for John Shuttleworth, Raise the Oof. Big fan of John Shuttleworth, if you don't already know. This is the second time I've went to see him live. The first time I went to see him live was back in 2020, right before the first lockdown. And it was a great, great show. I do prefer it over the 2020 tour. This one focused a lot more on... This one had a lot more stand-up stuff in it, whereas the 2020 tour was focused more on the singing. And there was a lot of songs in this, and obviously the songs were fantastic. But I really did enjoy the stand-up, and it was a great experience as well. When I went to see him live, in the foyer, they had like a stand of merchandise you can buy, and I did splash out quite a bit. And I ended up picking up a Yamaha Years tote bag. They also had these in yellow. A coffee mug. They also had these in yellow. A signed poster. A vinyl record. A bunch of CDs. And a DVD. Of course, because of the type of channel this is, I'm going to be focusing primarily on the CDs and the DVDs and so on. So the first CD I got there was the Yamaha Years. Absolutely classic album. If you're going to get into John Shuttleworth, I'd say this is one of your best introductions. This includes many classic songs, mostly from the 500 Bus Stops miniseries. This was originally released in 1997, but has been reissued quite a few times. But yeah, classic songs. My Wife Died in 1970, that one was really funny. You're Like Manchester is of course a classic. Eggs and Gammon. The Man Who Lives on the M62. Rye Edge, of course. 500 Bus Stops as well. Yeah, Pigeons in Flight, of course. I would only ever watch Eurovision if Pigeons in Flight was selected. Yeah, great album. I have to come clean, this is not the copy I got at the foyer. This is actually a second-hand copy. This is the copy I got in the foyer. Almost identical, except there's one major difference. This one, as you can see, the label's peculiar. This one's actually a CDR. You can tell by the fact that it's got a greeny, sort of turquoisey background. Which I don't know why they've started using CDRs rather than the conventional press discs, because my other copy's a press disc, as you can see. And it's normally not the end of the world if I get a CDR, like I can live with a CDR, but the problem though with this particular copy was the track You're Like Manchester doesn't seem to work properly on it. There's just like a massive gap of silence in the middle of the track. It's just like the track itself stops, goes silent, then resumes, and because the track length, the song cuts off abruptly as well. I don't know if it's a problem with the CD or whether or not it's just mastered poorly. I think it might be a mastering problem because it does this. It behaves exactly the same on every CD player I try it in, and when I ripped it, it had the same problem. So yeah, that was not very good. So I ended up getting a used copy. This is a. I did not want a CDR copy because I feared the problem might persist on other copies. So this one fortunately does work. The track plays from beginning to end without any problems, and the rest of the tracks work well as well. So yeah, if you want this album, I'd say this is available on the John Shuttleworth website. I'd say if you want this album, don't buy it from the Shuttleworth website because there's a very high chance that track won't work. I mean, the rest of the tracks work, it's just that track has problems. So I'd say if you can get a second-hand one for a decent price, get a second-hand one. Obviously I can't take this back or anything, but the way it was it was buy 2 CDs, get one free, so it wasn't that big of a loss, but still not great. Inside we just get a track listing and some notes inside about the ideal way to listen to the album, which is really fun. The Dolby Decades, 20 more of John's finest songs to date. This one's not quite as good as the Yamaha years. The tracks are a bit more hit and miss on it, but it's still a great album, as you might expect from John Shuttleworth. I mean, even lesser tier John Shuttleworth is still well worth your time. But there are a lot of really good songs on here. 3 Men in a Van, that song's fucking mental, but really, really funny. What else is there? Unaccompanied Lady, Fish and Chips. I can't go back to Savoury now. It's a great one. 2 Margarines on the Go, which is a nightmare scenario. One Foot of the Gravy is surprisingly quite a more grounded song when compared to many of the other songs on John Shuttleworth's albums. It's got a really good message behind it about environmentalism, which is something I know Graham Fellows, who's the guy who played John Shuttleworth, is very passionate about. Mutiny Over the Bounty, that's a great one as well. Yeah, bring back the cardboard strip on the Bounty bars is the CD. This one, like the Yamaha years, is also a CDR, but fortunately this one does work. All the tracks work perfectly from beginning to end. On the inside we just get a track listing, and we also get his new album, The Pummie Stone and Other Rock Songs, which was somewhat advertised in the show. The jokes about subliminal advertising get me every time. Yeah, this one's probably my least favourite of all the John Shuttleworth albums I've got. I think my favourite one is definitely the A1111 and Other Ones. But it's still a really good album. I get the feeling if I listen to it again, I'll probably get on with it more. Yeah, this one's the shortest album. This one's only got 14 tracks on it. The other ones have got like well over 20. But yeah, there's a lot of really good songs on there. Blue Like Kettle, Stay at Home, Protect the VHS. That's my national anthem. Yeah, great. Really good album. Here's the disc. And this one is a proper press disc, which is nice. The lyrics for The Pummie Stone, yeah, they're great. They're great fun. John Shuttleworth's albums are definitely well worth your time. In addition to the CD version of The Pummie Stone, I also have it on vinyl. Yeah, this is basically just the CD version, but on a vinyl record. I I don't have any means to play this yet, by the way. I still don't have a record player. I will get one eventually, but not at the moment. But yeah, very identical to the CD version, except side 1 and side 2, because obviously it's split over 2 sides, whereas the CD, all the tracks are on this single disc. But yeah, I won't bother getting the record because I think most people know what a record looks like. But there's the label. So I'm going to deviate slightly by showing something that isn't John Shuttleworth related, then I'll go back to something John Shuttleworth related. This is a CD set. This is one I got for my birthday, actually. My birthday was a few weeks ago. And this is Doctor Who, the BBC radio episodes. This is a collection of various radio episodes they did, sort of similar to Big Finish, except these were long before Big Finish. Most of these were like on BBC Radio, and I think there were a couple which were released on vinyl records originally. Many of these are mostly from the 90s, but also there's quite a few from the 70s as well. I've not listened to any of these yet, but I will get around to it eventually. But yeah, Paradise of Death, that was on radio. That was a John Pertwee one. Ghost of N Space, I think that's also John Pertwee. This was before his passing, January to February 1996. He passed away in May 96. Doctor and the Prescatons, that's Tom Baker one, I think. That was originally released on vinyl in 1976. Exploration Earth, The Time Machine, that's also another one. Whatever Happened to Susan, which I think it is on one of the DVDs as an extra, but I'm not sure. It might be on Dalek Invasion of Earth, but I'm not sure. I'll have to check that again at some point. Slip Back, that's Colin Baker one, I think. Unfortunately, all 9 discs are fucking stacked, which is... I hate that. It's really fucking annoying. So it's going to be a pain when I get around to actually listening to these. I don't know why they do this. It's terrible. It's not ideal in the slightest and very impractical. But I guess it's kind of a standard thing with massive BBC CD releases, because they do a similar thing with the missing episode audios, which I don't have any of the missing episode audios, and because I've got the loose cannon reconstructions, and even now they're fairly redundant because the lost episodes are getting animated. But yeah, that was Doctor Who, the BBC radio episodes. So now I move on to the DVDs, and this is a DVD I actually got when I went to see John Shuttleworth live. This is not a John Shuttleworth DVD, I've got all his DVDs already. But this is Father Earth. This was done by Graham Fellows, who of course created John Shuttleworth. This is a new film. It's a documentary film, primarily focusing on his plight to turn a disused church into an eco-friendly recording studio. Very, very interesting documentary. Maybe a bit aimless perhaps, because it starts out about him turning the church into a recording studio with his dad. But there's also some aspects about his relationship to John Shuttleworth as a character, about how he's come to sort of embrace it. And sort of by the end they remembered, it's about the eco-friendly recording studio, so he finishes it with his son post-COVID. But yeah, definitely worth a watch. Graham Fellows is just a generally charming individual. I mean, I've never met him, but I've heard he's a great guy from people who have met him, and even when he's out of character as John Shuttleworth, from what I've seen in interviews and from this film and so on, he just seems like an incredibly down-to-earth, sort of charming guy. But yeah, here's the inside. Inside we just get a little write-up. This film was in production for about 10 years, for I think about 15 years, 10, 15 years, give or take, because he started the projects back in, I think, 2009, I think. He mentioned it when he appeared on Carpool with Robert Llewellyn, which Carpool with Robert Llewellyn's definitely worth your time. It's just a pity he doesn't do it anymore. And that wank stick, James Corden plagiarised it and did his own version of it, which was cancelled itself and somehow made the news. And when it made the news, I was thinking, wow, slow news day. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about James Corden, I'm here to talk about Graham Fellows. But yeah, here's the disc. This annoyingly is a DVD-R. It's not a proper press disc like my John Shuttleworth DVDs are. I mean, it does work and everything, it's fine. With CDRs, DVD-Rs and CDRs, depending on the make, they will last a good while, providing you keep them out of sun and so on, which is what I'll be doing. And also, it doesn't have like any extras, or it doesn't even have a menu. It's just the film on the disc, and the DVD like stops when the film finishes. I think it stops, or it either stops or it loops. Or the film just goes on a constant loop until you take the disc out. Now move on to the rest of the DVDs. The first one is really, really depressing film, Christiana F. Full title, Christiana F. Wer Kinder der Bahnhof Zoo, which in English translates to We Children of the Zoo Station. This is a German film, as you might expect. Very, very, very good film, but very, very grim, a very, very hard watch. Based on a true story about a teenager living in West Berlin who became a heroin addict, who is still alive, surprisingly. She's the real Christiana F., whose real name is Christiana Falcerino. She's still alive somehow, although I don't know how much longer she'll be alive for, because she's got hepatitis and so on. But yeah, very interesting film. Definitely worth a watch, but definitely not a film for the faint-hearted. It is probably the most realistic film I've ever seen that depicts the horrors of drug addiction. This makes Trainspotting look like a fucking kids' film. That's just how grim this is. In fact, it's a film which I'll probably never ever watch again, despite how great it is, because it is just so grim. It's kind of like, even though I've never seen it, it's a bit like the way people describe Schindler's List, where it's a great film, but you have to really be in the right mood for it, and it's a film which you'll probably only watch once and never again. But yeah, highly recommend it, but you have to bear that in mind. This also features songs by David Bowie. The soundtrack is definitely a highlight, as you might expect from Bowie. But yeah, here's the disc. There's a sticker right here which was on the case, so I just stuck it in there. This is a DVD This is a very old DVD release from Second Sight. It's a non-anamorphic transfer, but given the fact that it was shot in 1:6:6:1 anyway, it doesn't really matter that much. I believe this was the first time the film was released uncut in this country, because when it was shown in cinemas, and especially on VHS, a lot of stuff was cut out of it for pretty obvious reasons, because the BBC used to take a very dim view of heroin use. And I believe the VHS versions also had this really shitty English dub. This doesn't have the dubbed version, thankfully. This is in its proper German language, but it does have English subtitles. This was also released on DVD by Arrow. Before Arrow Video, it was when they were known as Arrow Films, but I believe it's also a non-anamorphic transfer and doesn't have any of the extras. I mean, the extras on this are very light anyway. I think all it's got is production notes and so on. But the Arrow release is fuck all. This film hasn't got a proper video release since this DVD came out. it's in this country. It was released on Blu-ray in quite a lot of territories, but it's kind of hit or miss if they have English subtitles. I believe the German Blu-ray is the only one that actually has English subtitles. So I'd say definitely pick up the German Blu-ray. Or this version's not bad. This version's alright for what it is. Next up, we've got a very, very, very overlooked British political satire film from the early 70s. Peter Cook in The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, written by a third of the Monty Python team. Very, very interesting and very overlooked political satire film, which is, even though some aspects of it are of their time, a lot of it really hasn't dated at all, unfortunately, and considering the current political climate we're in. And in fact, it seems a lot more poignant today than it ever did back in the 70s. It's about this guy who basically comes out of nowhere. He works for an advertising company, and then he sort of goes through the ranks. He becomes the leader of a polling company and ends up getting involved in British politics. Definitely worth a watch, especially if you're into political history. The themes themselves are, I'd say, sadly even more relevant today than they ever were back in the 70s. In fact, the character in this, Michael Rimmer, he's kind of a bit like a Nigel Farage type character, or maybe like Boris Johnson or Elon Musk or so on. Where he's pretending, where he's basically acting charming, but he's an absolutely wicked piece of work. In fact, especially by the ending, at the end of the film, which I won't give away the ending of the film, but it's goes from being a comedy to a bloody horror film. And it seems more than likely, given the current political climate, when on both sides of the Atlantic, this film seems a lot more poignant than it ever did. It bombed at the time. It was originally meant to come out to coincide with the 1970 general election, which it actually predicted the results of. But Warner Brothers, who seem to have a vendetta against British films. I mean, to this day, they will not release the director's cut of Ken Russell's The Devils. Warner Brothers thought it would interfere with the election and cause controversy and so on, so they delayed it till months later, which of course didn't do it any favours, because the election had been and gone and most people didn't care about politics at that point. And it didn't receive particularly good reviews either. In fact, I believe it was never released theatrically in America, and other than a DVD release and so on, it's not really a film you hear much about. Although and surprisingly, despite the fact that the DVD is out of print, it's a title that holds no market value. I only got this for a couple of quid, still in its shrink wrap. But yeah, definitely worth a watch. Here's the disc. One thing a lot of complaints at the time, and to a degree today, people have of this film is Peter Cook's somewhat wooden performance as Michael Rimmer. Personally, I don't fully agree with that sentiment. I mean, he is wooden in this. I mean, Peter Cook's a pretty good actor in general, but I think it kind of works because he's sort of, Michael Rimmer's sort of a two-faced character. So I mean, he's trying to be charming. So he's a actor playing an actor, and so you can kind of get away with that. This was, I believe, Peter Cook's only solo role in a film, where he played a significant role in it, because he's mostly known for his collaborations with Dudley Moore. And sadly, he kind of went back to either working with Dudley Moore or being a bit part in other films, because this film bombed big time. But I would definitely recommend it, and I do think it is well worth your time. And that was The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer. Next up is Ghost World, based on an underground comic. Very, very good film. A film I didn't fully know what to expect when I was going into it. I mean, I'd heard it was great, but I'd never Obviously, I never read the comic and didn't fully know what it was about. But when I watched it, I really, really enjoyed it. Definitely worth a watch. A very interesting take on, especially sort of the teen movie of that period. Yeah, definitely worth a watch. Here's the disc. Next up, we've got something related to Last Update. Puff and Stuff, or Puff and Stuff Zaps the World, the movie. This is the film version of the old kids show HR Puff and Stuff. This was the film that was shown in Dan TYTD Reviews 24-hour housewarming party. Very good film. It's a kids film, so it's not the type of thing I'd usually buy. But I really do quite enjoy this film for what it is. It's fucking weird, which you might, if you're familiar at all with the TV show or the works of Sid and Marty Krofft, you kind of know what you're getting in for. But it is fucking weird. Very much a film in sort of the late 60s, early 70s period. But definitely great fun. Parts of it feel a bit like the superglued various episodes of the TV show together, but they also kind of did their own thing with it. It doesn't look like that big of an upgrade from the TV show. But to be fair, the TV show looked really impressive anyway, even by the standards of the 60s. One of the more jarring things was near the middle of the film, I think it was the middle of a musical number, they have the first half of the Universal logo used as stock footage, and it's jarring as hell. But yeah, definitely great fun. Yeah, this is a very nice 2-disc edition. I think this might be the only DVD edition this film has. The extra features on here are a little bit to be desired, because many of them were imported from the old TV show sets, because you got interviews with Jack Wilde, Billy Hayes, and Sid and Marty Krofft. And there's something weirdly melancholic about watching them these days, because the only person, as I'm recording this, who's still alive, who was an interview subject, is Sid Krofft. We lost Marty Krofft and Billy Hayes a few years back, and we lost Jack Wilde about 20 years ago. And the interviews were recorded in, I think, the early 2000s, and this DVD was released in 2011, I think. So Jack Wilde had long since passed. Yeah, it's kind of a pity what happened to him, and he was an incredibly talented child actor in the late 60s, and then he became an alcoholic later in life, and basically then died of oral cancer, bless him. By the way, I did do that screening of a few episodes of the TV show this was based on, and that was really fun as well. Watching a show aimed at children at 2 a.m, slightly inebriated as God intended. But yeah, it was really good fun. Really weird experience watching it. There was surprisingly a lot more like innuendos and stuff than I was expecting. The film version's fairly clean. I mean, this is fairly clean stuff, and I don't know if possibly it's just me overthinking it or it was intentional. Because, for example, there's an episode on here called "The Wheelie Bird." The witch has nicked Jimmy's flute again, and the way Puff and Stuff and gang decide to get it back is they create like a Trojan bird, just roll with it, and one of Witchy Poo's hench people is a vulture, and when he sees the bird, he wants to have his way with it, and he says stuff like, "Oh, hi there, sugar. Do you want to come in and I'll show you my dominoes? We could play some tiddlywinks. Why don't we have some kitsy poos?" I don't know if it's just me being a dirty bastard, but I could not. But that was probably like the funniest thing I'd ever seen at that point. Because it's so fucking bizarre, you know. I don't think you'd ever get away with lines like that on a kids' show today. But oh dear, it was good fun for what it was. And needless to say, the best part of this is definitely Billy Hayes as Witchy Pooh. She's absolutely delightful. She's basically a knockoff of the Wicked Witch of the West. In fact, this film is basically The Wizard of Oz as imagined by a meth addict. But yeah, that was Puff and Stuff. Right, so next up is The Player, directed by Robert Altman. Fantastic film, fantastic satire of sort of the Hollywood film industry. Stars Tim Robbins, Greta Scacchi, Fred Ward, Whoopi Goldberg, Peter Gallagher and Brian James, and a shit ton of cameos. Like, you would faint if you read like the amount of cameos in this film. Mainly a lot of actors sort of playing themselves. But yeah, a fantastic film. Definitely worth a watch. This is the old Pathé DVD. This film does not have a Blu-ray release in this country as of yet. I went for the Pathé DVD. There is a reissue DVD put out by Paramount, but the Paramount release is a load of crap. The covers are not very good on it, and it doesn't have any extras, whereas this one actually has a fairly decent amount of extras. I think most of the extras on the Blu-ray. In fact, I think the Blu-ray has more extras, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I think Pathé, with a lot of their early DVD releases, at least they tended to put the effort in. Here's the inside with the chapter listing, and there's the disc. Bind the artwork is the same as on the disc. Next up, we've got a couple of animated titles. First one is a TV show set, and this is the complete series of The Critic. This was a short-lived animated series created by former Simpsons showrunners Al Jean and Mike Reiss. Great show. Has developed a massive cult following despite only lasting 2 seasons and having only like 23 episodes. You might recognise the character Jay Sherman, voiced by John Lovitz. There was a crossover episode with The Simpsons, which Matt Groening famously hated. He didn't like the idea of crossovers and felt it was a shameless promotion. And yeah, I can kind of understand why. But at the same time, I don't agree with his public outbursts about it, and he took his name off the credits to that episode. I'll talk more about that episode of The Simpsons in part 2. But yeah, you might notice this is a Australian import, my only Australian title. The only countries to my knowledge that got this show on DVD are the United States and Australia. I went for the Australian version because this has the extras which were on the old Columbia TriStar DVD from the United States. And I knew the chances of it actually working in Region 2, despite the fact that Australia uses Region 4, were far higher. And this one, thankfully, does work on Region 2. It works on, according to Parody DVD, where you can actually look up the disc's region codes. It also works on Region 4, 3 and 1. It says right there, this disc is NTSC, despite the fact that, like the UK, Australia also uses the PAL system. So I'm going to assume they just reused the old American master, which is an NTSC. It's not that big of a deal. One thing, it doesn't have PAL speed up or anything, but it's slightly bizarre. Here are the discs. I'll just turn this way. I don't know why they put that there. How to take the disc out. Like, yeah, I think most of us know how to take a disc out of a case. But inside there we have adverts for other TV show titles from Sony. Here's the little leaflet thing. On the thermometer, this film rates a 0. This lists the episodes that are on each disc. Season 1 was originally shown on ABC in America, and I believe it didn't get particularly high viewing figures, and ABC didn't like it because reasons. I mean, ABC have always been a bit funny when it comes to adult animation. I mean, they screwed over the Clerks animated series about 5 years later, and it got cancelled after the first season, and then it moved to Fox for the second season. And Gene and Reese, they'd worked on The Simpsons prior, and they thought Fox would be more forgiving of it, and they were, but the management changed right before the second season aired, and they didn't like it either, so it was axed after one season at Fox, and that's kind of the way it's been. Although they did do a couple of webisodes which were not great. They did change some aspects of season 2, in the first season it's fairly well established that Jay Sherman is a bachelor, and that's one of the bigger differences between him and between the show and a lot of other adult animation shows of the period, is the fact there wasn't a family dynamic to it. Jay Sherman was pretty much the central focus of the show, and he was meant to be a bachelor, and he was. And then in the second season, I think on the assistance of Fox, they gave him a love interest. Who I didn't mind the love interest in it, but he kind of missed the point a bit of Sherman's character. But season 2 is not bad. It's still really good. Season 2, the writing's still top notch. The most famous episode, famous amongst people who know about The Critic, and is actually from season 2, which was the Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert episode, which is fantastic, and sort of a play on the theories that they both hated each other on their TV shows and stuff, which they didn't, from what I understand. It's a lot more complicated than that, but they actually provided their own voices, which is very interesting. But yeah, definitely worth a watch. Sort of very similar kind of humour to The Simpsons. I think if you like The Simpsons, you'll probably get on with The Critic. And find a couple of DVDs, a couple of Ralph Bakshi films. I've finally finished my Ralph Bakshi collection. I finally own all his films physically. And so the first one is Hey Good Looking. This one came out in the early 80s, although it was intended to come out in the early mid 70s. Not Bakshi's strongest film. At this point you can kind of tell that I was buying these just for completionist sakes, but it's all right. Hey Good Looking, for what it is. It's not great, but it's not bad either. This is very much sort of like the anti-Grease or the anti-Happy Days, sort of a spoof on the 50s nostalgia boom of the 70s and the 80s. A certain decade being romanticized in another decade isn't a new phenomenon. It didn't start in the 2010s with massive unhealthy nostalgia for the 80s. It actually started back in the 70s with nostalgia for the 50s. This is sort of, it feels like although it has some nostalgia towards the 50s period, it's very much the anti-50s movie. It does not shy away, from many of the unsavoury aspects of the decade, which was supposedly a very clean decade. Even the gangs were bursting into song in the 50s. This film doesn't shy away from the dark underbelly of it, because there was a lot of racism depicted in it, a lot of sexism, the gang violence as well. It's not really a film for the faint-hearted, and it's not Bakshi's like strongest satirical film. I'd say probably go towards one of his earlier films if you want more of that. But it's a very interesting watch. It originally began production as a live-action animation hybrid back in the mid-70s, but they were doing something very interesting with it, where the main cast were animated, but the rest of the actors were live-action. And what's funny is they don't draw attention to that at all in the film, from what I understand. And they did finish the live action animation version, and it is out there. It does exist in one of Warner Brothers' many vaults, but then Warner Brothers at the last minute decided to cut their funding and said, the film's not working, it's not marketable, this, that, the other. It's possibly because Coonskin came out in the meantime, and obviously that sparked massive controversy, which it didn't deserve any of that controversy, by the way, if you've seen that film, but it did anyway. So basically what Bakshi did was, because Warner Brothers had cut their funding for it, and because this was Bakshi's passion project, what he did was in between production of Wizards and American Pop, he was actually finishing the film himself. He self-financed it, which is very interesting, and the film was finally released in the early 80s as a completely animated film, and didn't do very well, but I believe did obtain a cult following over time. But yeah, I think this is the only one of Bakshi's films I know that doesn't have a Blu-ray release in any part of the world, and it actually took a very long time for this to get a DVD release. This is released in 2013, and this is an American release on the Warner Archive collection, which is the Burn on Demand service they used to operate. And as you can see, this is a DVD-R. It's not a proper press disc. But it does work and everything, and at least it's got a decent transfer and so on. One Archive Blu-rays are typically proper press discs, whether the DVDs are DVD-Rs. But yeah, it is region free. Thankfully, I wasn't sure whether or not it would be region free or region 1 locked, but it's region free. It works on all my various players. And the final DVD and the final Ralph Bakshi film, which is his final feature film, the infamous Cool World. Not a very good film at all. The only reason why I really got this was for completionist sakes. It's very much a mess of a film. It's not as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's pretty shonky, and you can kind of tell from a mile off this film had tons of production issues. Quite infamously, this film originally started out as this came out after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and sort of when interest in live action animation hybrids kind of became big. Bakshi originally wrote this as a horror film about a guy who has sex with a cartoon character, and they give birth, and the cartoon character gives birth to like this hybrid child, and the hybrid child goes on a revenge spree to kill his father. It sounds very interesting, bonkers, and maybe an acquired taste, but which is something you'd expect from Bakshi. But it was very heavily rewritten behind Bakshi's back by the producer, because the producer was sick of making horror films, which, you mean, fair enough if you're getting sick of horror films, but why did you agree to it in the first place if you don't like it? Hollywood, man. And you can kind of tell the script is an absolute mess, makes no sense whatsoever. The acting is terrible for the most part. The animation itself, when it's not interacting with the live action characters, it's all right, but when it is, yeah, it's pretty unconvincing. I believe this was considered a technical achievement at the time because of the use of multiplane effect, but I don't think it's a very high technical achievement because Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out before this and still holds up, whereas this, the animation live action, it probably looks laughable even at the time. But it has some interesting ideas in it, and I get the feeling there's a good film in there, but the studio interference definitely ruined any potential it had. And here's the disc. So now we move on to the Blu-rays, and the first Blu-ray is a Ralph Bakshi film, and this is Fire and Ice, or Fire and Ice to give it its English title. This is a German Blu-ray. This does have a UK DVD, but it's long out of print, and to be honest, it's out on Blu-ray in Germany, so why not pick up the German Blu-ray? Yeah, for some reason this has a Blu-ray released in like every part of the world except the UK for some reason. This was Bakshi's sort of collaboration with Frank Frazetta, the famous comic artist who did a lot of fantasy illustrations, Conan the Barbarian kind of stuff. This came out during the big sort of fantasy boom of sort of the early mid-80s, which of course didn't last because pretty much all the films in it bombed, including this. This was, I believe this was Bakshi's attempt, because a lot of Bakshi's films, they're great films, but they're very niche appeal. Like, there's not that many people who would like be that interested in watching any of his films, and this was sort of his attempt to do like a proper mainstream film. Of course, it didn't work because it bombed. You can kind of tell it was Bakshi's attempt to sell it, because this is Cool World's kind of fascinatingly bad. I mean, this is not a terrible film. It's okay as kind of like a Sunday afternoon kind of feature, but when compared to Bakshi's other films, this one's really pretty bland. It's kind of a very below average sword and sorcery movie. Like the plot, the characters are very one-dimensional and weak. It's got some alright. It's got an interesting visual look to it. Even though, like with some of Bakshi's other films, this is entirely rotoscoped. But it's not a terrible film, and I think if you're into like your sword and sorcerer and your fantasy films, I would recommend. You probably might get something out of it. I'm kind of take it or leave it with that genre. But yeah, well, it's a very nice Blu-ray, all things considered. Here's the disc. nice bit of fan service on the disc there. Latriga, I think she's called, showing off her arse. It's kind of amusing, with it being a Bakshi film, like the femme fatale and the main woman character, it's got like massive boobs and a massive arse. It's kind of like a Barbie doll, in the sense that I don't think she'd stand up in real life. But yeah, is the reversible artwork, which is the same as the normal artwork, except it doesn't have the ratings symbol on it, which is something you get with German releases. Some of them have reversible artwork, some of them don't. So now we move on to a couple of films I haven't seen yet. These are fairly recent purchases. The first one is Interview with the Vampire. Not seen this, but I've heard really good things about it. Directed by Neil Jordan, who also directed The Company of Wolves, and I really like Company of Wolves, so this should be an interesting watch. Based on a book, I believe. That's the back. And there's the disc. And the final one I haven't seen yet is Dog Soldiers, British horror film about werewolves from the early 2000s. I believe this was a fairly early film shot on digital cameras. I've not seen it, but I've heard it's really good fun. Really kind of fun sort of popcorn film. Stars Sean Pertwee, who of course is the son of John Pertwee. So yeah, it's definitely worth a watch for that front. Here's the disc. Then we move on to the films I have seen. This is a film I really need to watch again at some point. The Wicker Man. Very influential British horror film from the early 70s. This is not the shitty Nicolas Cage remake as the original. Now, I have seen this film before. I saw it a couple of years ago on, I think it was a Film 4 airing of it, and I couldn't entirely get on with it. But it's the type of film where I think you have to be in the right mood for it, and it's a film I really want to watch again because I do like a lot of stuff about it. And I do think if I was in a better frame of mind for it, I'd probably get on with it more. This is a very nice Blu-ray put out by Studio Canal from the Vintage Classics collection. This is a 2-disc set and includes all 3 cuts. This includes the final cut, which was the version I saw. Which I do recall had some kind of weird quality drops because like most of it was from the original film negatives and some of it was sourced from like slightly ropier copies. We also get the director's cut and the theatrical cut. Here's the inside. There's disc 1 with the final cut, disc 2 with the director's cut and the theatrical cut. Next up, we've got another one from this Vintage Classics collection, Don't Look Now. Absolutely brilliant film, absolutely classic British horror film from the early 70s, directed by Nicholas Roeg, who, this is the only Nicholas Roeg film I've seen. Really need to see more of his stuff. There's the back. Great film. Yeah, so disc 1, there's disc 2. Yeah, I mean, Studio Canal releases are typically like really good. They tend to put in a lot of effort, especially with the Vintage Classics collection. In fact, they're almost borderline boutique label levels. Next up, we've got really good documentary film. One of the best documentaries I've seen, actually. Crumb, directed by Terry Zwigoff, who also directed Ghost World. A documentary about the underground comic artist Robert Crumb, who's probably best known for the Keep On Trucking illustration and is also probably best known for creating Fritz the Cat, which the first time I'd heard of Crumb was actually through Fritz the Cat, and I think like most people, not through the comic, the film version directed by Ralph Bakshi, which Crumb notoriously hated the film version. So much so that he killed off Fritz in a later comic. Brilliant film, this. Crumb is a very sort of isolated individual. He doesn't tend to do that much public appearances and doesn't tend to do that much promotional stuff, in fact, and doesn't like a lot of mainstream stuff. In fact, that's probably one of the main reasons why I didn't like the Fritz the Cat film, was probably because it made his work a bit too mainstream, and he ended up growing to despise Keep On Trucking. But however, he's friends with he was or still is friends with Terry Zwigoff. So Terry Zwigoff could film a lot more personal stuff with Crumb. Crumb, he's a very interesting individual, and I do admire him as an artist. However, his political views, especially his views towards women, are very, very, very questionable. He's not afraid to hide the fact that he doesn't like women, because he was never lucky in love when he was in high school. And I kind of get the feeling that if Crumb came of age today, he'd probably be an Andrew Tate loving incel. I mean, the film is very unbiased, which is something I really like about it. I mean, it's not. I mean, it does show like, the influence of his artwork, but at the same time doesn't shy away from his very, very, very questionable beliefs. It's definitely a film where, it doesn't tell you like what to think of him. Like, it doesn't like condone his actions or anything, but it's a film that makes you think. If you watch it, you'd leave the film with your own interpretations of what you make of Crumb, which I think is really interesting. Even though I don't agree with many of Crumb's points of view, it is very interesting, especially from his family. Like, Crumb seems like Robert seems to be like the only sort of vaguely sane member of his family, which is really interesting. Going back to the point of Crumb's views on women, there's a bit in this where they go for a fairly infamous Mr. Natural comic, where Mr. Natural gives this guy like basically a woman without a head. Well, we think she doesn't have a head, and the guy can basically have his way with her and so on. And yeah, it's really, really fucking dodgy and pretty uncomfortable stuff. But yeah. Inside here we have the disc, and behind there we have the scribblings of Charles Crumb, who's his brother, who has various mental health issues and so on. He was interviewed quite heavily for the film and sadly committed suicide before the film was released. But I mean, he was quite sympathetic, despite the fact that he's not all there really. And definitely later on, because Robert and Charles used to write comics together when they were kids, and then kind of Robert became the comic artist himself, and Charles eventually just started basically like his text panels started taking over the comics, and then he eventually just started writing like tons of ramblings in a journal, which basically just evolved into tons of squiggles. But yeah, here's the booklet it comes with, which you get on a lot of Criterion titles. And a little sticker right there, approved by Terry Zwigoff. Next up is another brilliant film, 24-Hour Party People, starring Steve Coogan, a biopic of Tony Wilson, who was a DJ during the 70s, fairly prolific run, and was the manager of Joy Division. Must thank my friend Liam for introducing me to this film, because I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Didn't know much about Tony Wilson when I saw it, but definitely a very interesting film. Shot for the most part with digital cameras. It was this one came out in 2002, so it was fairly early. When you watch it on Blu-ray, the Blu-ray doesn't look all that good, because it was like very, very, very primitive cameras, so the film for the most part is pretty much in standard definition, and quite ropey looking standard definition at that. So if you know what you're getting in for with the Blu-ray, it's not going to blow your socks off, and I think if you've already got the DVD, there's not really any point upgrading to the Blu-ray. But yeah, definitely worth a watch. Here's the disc. Next up is absolute classic Harold and Maude, classic cult movie with Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort. Absolutely fantastic film. Surprisingly, a somewhat more wholesome and more light-hearted film, despite its fairly dark subject matter, because the main character in this, he constantly like stages his own suicide, and he attends funerals, the funerals of strangers, and he ends up befriending an eccentric elderly woman, and it sort of blossoms. It sounds very, very dodgy, the way I described it, but it's not. Even the film itself is fully aware of just how dodgy it sounds. And it is an absolutely fantastic film. Definitely worth a watch. If you're into cult movies, I'd highly recommend Harold and Maude. This is the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray, which is always good. I mean, I really like the Masters of Cinema titles. It's just a pity many of the ones I want are out of print, including this one. I managed to get this for about under 25 quid from CEX. It normally goes for a lot more than that, but still. Anyway, here's the disc, and there's the booklet, which you'd kind of expect from Masters Cinema sort of titles. Yeah, and also, I really don't know if it's me, but I swear, when you actually watch the film itself, Bug Court looks an awful lot like Jack Wilde. It's probably just me, though. Anyway, this is Spinal Tap. Brilliant film, this again. A mockumentary about sort of a fictional rock band called Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap is not a real band in the traditional sense. They do record some albums and so on, but they were a comedy band who were originally created for a sketch show, and then they turned it into a mockumentary. In fact, it's a British band, and yet none of the members are actually British. They're American actors mostly, including Harry Shearer, who later went on to do various voice roles on The Simpsons. But yeah, absolutely hilarious film. Although despite the fact they're American, they actually do the British accents really well. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I'd swear they were English. They're a lot more convincing than Dick Van Dyke's English accent, I'll tell you that for nothing. But yeah, absolutely hilarious film. Something I really like about it was the fact that it does look very realistic. It does feel like an actual documentary film about basically a rock band sort of crumbling as they go on tour. In fact, a lot of people did genuinely believe Spinal Tap was an actual band. They weren't, as I mentioned. But it is very convincing as a film and very well made. Here's the back. Funniest film ever made, according to BBC, which I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's definitely up there. Anyway, here's the disc. This particular release is very, very contentious because this particular title is prone to disc rot. I don't know why. I'm assuming it might be very early pressings are prone to disc rot. It's out of print, by the way, so I got it second hand. But it's in really nice condition, and I was trying to look for later pressings because the chances of it being rot free are probably higher. And this copy is rot free. As you can see, it's not kind of funny colour or anything, and the disc does work. I can watch the film from beginning to end without any problems. I'll keep my eye on it for any further developments, but for the most part it seems to be working fine, and hopefully it will continue to work fine for many years to come. Then we've got Salem's Lot, based on a Stephen King book. This was a TV miniseries, which I believe was the first sort of Stephen King miniseries and one of the most successful ones. And I believe it was so successful when it was shown on American television in some countries, it actually got a cinema release. I don't know if it got a cinema release in this country, but I know in some countries it did get a cinema release. But yeah, very enjoyable film. Not my favourite Stephen King adaptation, but still very much worth a watch. The second half is better than the first half, definitely, but the first half's not bad at introducing the characters. Here's the disc. Like what they did with the It miniseries on Blu-ray, this is actually, despite the fact this was originally shared on TV in two parts, they edited it together into sort of a movie, which I don't like it when they do that. I prefer, to have it in, because that always means they're going to chop stuff out of it. I always prefer it when it's when it's the way it was originally aired on TV, where it's two parts. and it's much easier if you're going to watch it over 2 nights like what I did. But yeah. Next up is a cinematic classic, Bonnie and Clyde, with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. Brilliant film. Very sort of challenging film at the time, because this was one of the first big films to depict violence, on the scale. Though these days it's pretty tame. In fact, I believe it's now 15. Because this is definitely not an 18 sort of film. But definitely a really good film. And very daring in terms of the violence and the sexual politics of it. Based on a true story about 2 outlaws during the Great Depression. And definitely worth watching. Also stars the late great Gene Hackman, who sadly recently died, and also has a surprising cameo from Gene Wilder. I think this might have been before Gene Wilder became famous, but it's kind of surprising to see him show up. And despite the fact this, for the most part, is a pretty serious film, I couldn't really take his performance that serious in it, but I think that was the point. He was meant to be more comedic. But yeah, here's the disc. Next Blu-ray is LA Confidential, which, ignoring the fact that it stars Rapey McFuckface, is an absolutely brilliant film. One I've been meaning to watch for a long time, but I've just never got around to. Kind of a bit of a misleading cover, because they changed it from the poster, but really Guy Pearce and Russell Crowe are really the main characters, and yet they're kind of segmented to the bottom. Kevin Spacey's he's in it a fair bit, but he's not that prominent in it. Danny DeVito's in it quite a bit as well. Kim Basinger is barely in it, and yet she's always front and centre on the covers, I guess because of eye candy reasons. But yeah, really good film, really good sort of detective film, set in the 50s, I believe. Here's the disc. And the final Blu-ray and the final item for part 1. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, absolutely hilarious film. One of the few sort of intentionally so bad it's good movies that actually works. And this one is absolutely hilarious. I'm laughing my ass off pretty much consistently throughout this. Yeah, very enjoyable. The set design in particular is really stand out, and in fact it kind of feels a bit like the type of film somebody like Tim Burton or Joe Dante would have made. And yeah, definitely worth watching. This was previously released by Arrow on Blu-ray, but the Arrow Blu-ray is long out of print. That I didn't know this had been reissued until I went into HMV one day and they had it, and I just bought it. And this was released by Final Cut. I don't really know what's different between the Final Cut version and the Arrow version. Maybe the Arrow version probably has more extras, but this one still has a fairly decent selection of extras. And I don't know if the transfer's any different, but still. Anyway, here's the disc. So yeah, that's the end of part 1. I'll see you next time for part 2.